The U.S. and China will hold their first senior-level meetings in person next week. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan will hold talks with Chinese foreign policy officials in Alaska. It's the first such meeting between the countries under the Biden administration. Here's how Secretary Blinken is outlining his priorities.
This is an important opportunity for us to lay out in very frank terms the many concerns that we have with Beijing's actions and behavior that are challenging the security, the prosperity, and the values of the United States and our partners and allies.
The talks are expected to come after Secretary Blinken meets with U.S. partners in South Korea and Japan. For more, let's bring in CBS News senior foreign affairs correspondent and Face the Nation moderator, Margaret Brennan. Hi there, Margaret. Good to see you again. So what specific issues will be a priority for Secretary Blinken to discuss with Chinese officials next week, and where might we see cooperation?
Well, it's interesting because Friday, tomorrow, you will see President Biden meet with the so-called Quad. And in some ways, he's setting the table for the conversations that will come at the Secretary of State and Defense Secretary levels in the coming days. President Biden will be meeting with the leaders of Australia, of India, of Japan. And while they're saying, oh, this isn't about China, it's about China. All of these powers have seen themselves under threat from that behemoth in the region. And so you hear the Biden administration talk about the U.S. in the Indo-Pacific. They're basically saying that's what we're going to call China's backyard, and we're going to come up with a strategy to counter this weight. And so that is what we will expect the Secretaries of State and Defense to follow up on next week when they fly to our treaty allies in South Korea and in Japan, countries that we have a military commitment to help defend, but also other areas of interest with. And that's coming before the face-to-face with those top Chinese officials that you mentioned. But part of this is to show that the Biden administration is just throwing out the Trump administration's plan to go head-to-head and instead try to build these alliances up to show a unified front. So two things that I'm watching there are to see what coordinated action there might be, for instance, in terms of military exercises in the region, but also we're seeing the Wall Street Journal report tonight that you're about to see the European Union announce the very first sanctions related to human rights abuses in China since 1989, and that they will do it because of what the U.S. and some European officials are calling genocide underway at the hands of China against Muslim minorities in the Xinjiang region. So those are the kind of coordinated policies you can expect to see more of. And in terms of cooperation with China, we'll have to wait and see. This is something that the administration, they will look to broker areas of common interest. Climate, for example. No climate agreement really means much unless you have the world's two biggest emitters, and that's the United States and China, agreeing to actually do something about their own problems at home. So we know that the administration is going to lean on them for cooperation on that front, but there's a lot of confrontation ahead on a lot of different issues otherwise.
All right, we'll continue to watch that. Meantime, let's talk about the hacking of Microsoft Exchange servers that was reported last week. Hundreds of thousands of customers are believed to have been victims of this really aggressive cyber attack. Margaret, what is the Biden administration doing to address this?
We're waiting to hear exactly what they plan to do in terms of shoring up U.S. capabilities to defend ourselves. We know that there are executive actions that were already in the works to deal with the last major hacking, the SolarWinds hacking, which really was a major espionage effort throughout the federal government on behalf of Russia to get into our systems and steal our sort of very top secrets. And they did that through private sector entities. This time, you are seeing this different attack that was launched through Microsoft and these Exchange servers, and it's really targeting businesses, it's state governments, it's local governments, and from what I'm hearing, it is very widespread. It is a massive hacking. I know our Nicole Skanga has done some reporting to say that even President Biden himself was personally briefed on how deep this goes into the U.S. infrastructure. And we don't know yet what they're going to do to respond. You have seen the FBI, you've seen CISA, that agency take some actions to warn the public and to warn companies how to protect themselves. But in terms of the punitive action against the criminal groups that are also exploiting some of these hacking vulnerabilities, that's TBD. We will have to see what the Biden administration does to go after some of these criminal elements that I'm told have roots in Russia and also have roots in China.
Well, Margaret, it has been 1 year now since the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a global pandemic. We know a lot more now than we did when it started. I'm wondering at this point, what questions do you have now as we head into spring?
Well, there's still so many. I think for all of us, we're waiting to see how serious these new variants that are showing themselves to be growing out of the New York City area in particular, also out of the UK, that appear to be resilient against some of the therapies and vaccines, just how much they can actually pierce our protection level, because our hope is riding on these vaccines and returning us to normal. That's a huge question, and I feel like we're still not scientifically fully informed yet on how dangerous these new mutants could be. I have bigger policy questions in terms of what needs to be fixed still within our health infrastructure. Right now, you are looking at a situation where you keep hearing from the Biden administration, don't worry, supply is coming. But the problem, in addition to supply, is getting it out there and convincing the public. And that vaccine hesitation is going to become more and more of a real issue for the rest of us as we start to see how much of our American public just refuses to take the vaccine. So do we ever really get to a place where this is under control, or do we have to prepare ourselves every few months to take a look around and say, it's cold weather, it's Christmas again, you got to put your mask back on, you got to stay indoors, you can't go out into restaurants. I mean, those are the kind of questions I have. And then for the World Health Organization, I got plenty in terms of what's coming up with this report that'll touch on China and the origins of the virus in the first place.
Yeah, no, but there's so many questions, as you point out, with respect to these variants and with the vaccine skepticism or hesitancy. It's really just a variety of reasons, too, that people have. It's not sort of just any one thing, which just adds to the constellation of uncertainty moving forward here. Very quickly, Margaret, before we let you go, on a lighter note, I learned about something called Dispo last week from your new podcast, Facing Forward.
Oh,
you have another new episode dropping tomorrow. Of course I did. It was great. But you have another new episode dropping tomorrow. What can we expect?
We do, and it's a good conversation, I think. I had with Sally Krawcheck, who I covered for years, knew her as one of the most powerful executives on Wall Street when she was at the top of Citigroup, at the top of Bank of America, also, by the way, one of the most powerful women. And now she is running her own boutique firm that is giving financial advice and sort of robo-investing, where you can go in and invest small amounts automatically to build up your savings. That's her business. But her perspective here is on what to do coming out of this pandemic, which has economically really set women behind. We have been hurt the most in terms of the disproportionate share of job cuts, in terms of productivity, in terms of highlighting the lack of social safety net in this country. And so she lays out, I think, in some really useful terms, some advice there for planning for women to be thinking, but not just for women, also for our broader society, because that's the point here is you can't get the economy to return to where it was unless you get all the participants back into it. And those participants disproportionately who have been hurt are women, particularly those of color. So she's got some advice there on what to do. I think it's a pretty good conversation. I hope you'll listen.
Yeah, I'm absolutely looking forward to it. New episodes of Facing Forward come out on Fridays. Margaret Brennan. Margaret, thank you so much.
Thanks, Elaine.